Hey, you want to know what turns the creepiest man in the world on? Find out when Mysterious World TV explores the mind of researcher, archivist, author, and weird lecturer John E. L. Tenney. Immerse yourself into the realm of the weird, where Devin and John discuss topics ranging from conspiracy theories, ancient aliens, time travel, cryptozoology, mind control, hauntings, and EVP. Journey with us through the infinite dimensions in the mind of John E. L. Tenney.
All right, John, thanks for joining us today.
No problem.
Okay, so how did this all start? Your interest, let's start with the paranormal. Did something happen as a child, or is this just something that's grown from curiosity?
I am one of the very few people that doesn't have a childhood experience of seeing a ghost or having an imaginary friend. Like in this community, it seems like everyone has a story about when they were little.
Yeah.
And as I got older, I was in the punk rock scene for a long time. And so I was just never very good with people telling me, you can't do this, you can't know this. Mm-hmm. These are things that no one will ever know. That didn't sit well with me. So I befriended someone who was a Kennedy assassinologist. He was my mentor. And I started helping him do lectures on the Kennedy assassination. And at some point, people would say, do you think that Kennedy was shot because of what he knew about UFOs? And I wanted to be able to speak on that. My first job, was for Unsolved Mysteries, which at the time was just a murder mystery show. It was Unsolved Murders, and then somehow or another it morphed into ghosts and hauntings and UFO sightings.
But like even, like a little 7, 8-year-old kid, you weren't interested then. If this was when you were like a teenager or a young adult? Or...
Yeah, as a little kid, I'm absolutely sure I read a book on Bigfoot or UFOs. I was a little kid, and I love science fiction and horror, and I used to read a ton of comic books. So, I'm sure there was some interest. But I feel that in this community, the stories people have from when they're little kids, those are more manufactured as adults.
Right.
Like they feel they need to say, my whole life, I've been involved in psychic phenomena. My whole life I've been interested in ghosts.
We used to see that on American Idol. I've wanted this my whole life. How old are you? 11?
Right.
Okay, so
right.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so you're interested in everything from paranormal, cryptozoology, time travel, mind control. Is there any subject that's your absolute favorite to discuss?
I think that if I look back throughout my entire history, all of the lecturing I've ever done, there's just something that always draws me to outer space. Life in space, futuristic civilizations, aliens. So I think that somewhere in my heart of hearts is my absolute favorite.
Okay, so that's I love that subject too. So I got like a million questions.
Okay.
So the first one, do you have a theory then? The people that discuss the ancient aliens were helping mankind initially. Do you have a theory on that? For example, when they talk about the missing link, they said, how do we go from knuckle scraping Neanderthals to creating pyramids? In between there, where was that little jump, that technological jump? And the theories out there is that these ancient aliens came down and were feeding us this information. Do you have thoughts on that?
I feel like that's an answer that you can give, to solve those questions. I think that it's probably a little bit stranger than that. I feel like human beings have probably existed for millions of years. I think when you look back 50,000 years to that missing link, you're not going back far enough.
Right.
Like you're seeing something happen. But for me, I've always, again, when you do research and you read about the civilizations, people nowadays put those civilizations, whether it be Atlantis or Lemuria or Mu or any of those civilizations, they always say like it was some kind of alien culture that was here. I would tend to believe that even the civilization we're going through now is just one more time we've done this. Like human beings have been through evolved stages of technology, and at some point it fails, it collapses, and it falls apart. And I think that humans are a lot older, and we don't give ourselves enough credit for being able to do things, Just because we can't build the pyramids now, we think to ourselves, well, we're the most highly advanced, technologically advanced we've ever been, so it must have been aliens that built the pyramids.
Right.
You're not giving credit to people who were in tune with nature.
Right.
They were doing something purely out of the love of their gods and the universe and the mysteries of the universe. Like, you can accomplish a lot when you're not worried about paying an electric bill or if you have a flat screen television set.
Exactly. Well, there's some people as well that think we've actually de-evolved ourselves, and maybe on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and they were also talking that I think it was after the Ice Age. Is that where we started to see blonde hair and blue eyes?
Right.
And so then there was the theory then that that could be alien migrants.
Right. And I don't doubt if there are aliens and they're technologically advanced far beyond us. I'm sure they'd come here.
Right.
But it wouldn't be something that you would stumble upon in discovery. Like, a good example is UFO sightings now. Traditionally, a UFO is seen with lights and flashing lights. That's kind of ridiculous to me, to a highly advanced, technologically superior race to have headlights
Right.
on their mechanical ships that they fly through
The
space.
reverse people
Yeah,
up on their
it doesn't make
spaceship.
any sense. So when those kind of UFO sightings happen, I tend to think that that's advanced human technology that we don't know about, we're not being allowed to know about.
Well, and like you said, I mean, by the time it's been declassified, how far ahead is the government anyway?
Exactly.
And then what about the theories? What is the thing about, they think there's aliens under, is it Denver Airport?
Oh, the Denver
What's-
airport.
yeah,
Yeah, because
what is
there's a
that?
whole bunch of Freemasonic and strange, mysterious signals and signs all incorporated into the national airport. And so, of course, someone has to tie it into a much larger grand conspiracy. A lot of people don't realize that most large structures, whether it be an airport, have massive underground complexes underneath them. You have to have storage, you have to have places where people take breaks.
Right.
And so when someone learns that there's a huge underground complex beneath an airport, and when you walk in, there are Freemasonic symbols incorporated into the structure, that conspiracy mind jumps out at people. When in reality, like, Masonic architecture, Masonic symbology has been with us for hundreds and hundreds of years. You can see it in any city that you go to, the way that roads are set up. Even Detroit, has its pentagram of roads, the way Washington, D.C. does. And it doesn't mean that there's some huge hidden ulterior motive. It just means that very influential, popular, powerful people belong to these societies where those symbols were important.
Going back with the aliens as well, you can go and Google aliens and they come up with all these different races of aliens and what their goal is. Either they want to dominate us or they want to protect us. Is that all fantasy? I mean, where does all that come from then?
I think that, I have no idea, right? Honestly, no idea. I love to believe that perhaps we are being visited by dozens and dozens and dozens of different races. Unfortunately, if you look at like a traditional gray, which everybody, the big-headed, black-eyed aliens,
Right.
like biologically, to exist on our planet, like they don't make any sense. The skeletal structure is too thin, their heads couldn't be held up by these tiny thin necks and our gravity. And then people say like, well, they come from a planet of different gravity. But they're here now, so our gravity affects them. So like they would have to be in giant spacesuit containers, which would be mistaken for a different type of alien.
Right.
You would have a gray that you see inside a ship, a gray in some kind of biomechanical suit outside of the ship. I would love to think that all of these races are real, and perhaps they are, but I think that a lot of it just has to do with some kind of weird archetypes that we hold in our brain, whether it be the fairy people of the 1500s or the aliens that people were contacting in the 1950s. The contactee movement gets completely, not even talked about anymore.
Yeah,
the fact that
exactly.
we had
That's
thousands of people worldwide that were interacting with blonde-haired people from Venus or Mars. And even in the paranormal community with hauntings and seances, most of the mediums that were doing channeling in the turn of the century were talking to people on Mars. They were talking to people on Venus. They weren't talking to the spirit world.
right.
They were channeling people and beings. Even there's a book that's called, I think it's called My Trip to Mars. And it was a channeler in the 1900s who talked to Jesus Christ, who was living on Mars at the time. So, there's just this vast array of stories and ideas that have kind of gotten whitewashed
Yeah.
because they're too crazy. But the two crazy ones are the ones that are really interesting to read about and why they developed and why they formed.
Exactly. And what about the black-eyed kids? Have you heard about that? That's pretty creepy.
I have heard about it. I think that that's a kind of growing narrative. I think that's kind of modern folklore that we're seeing, because first real instances of it being talked about are in the kind of mid-90s,
Right.
and it didn't really go anywhere, and then all of a sudden, like, it burst, and there were books, and people were seeing them all over the place. And I really do think it's kind of this folklore nature of
There's any
of
substance.
rumored stories.
Yeah, because that's pretty creepy. Because when it comes to the children that are just there's something ultimately creepy about a
Little
child
kids
with
and
no
dolls.
emotions, just like let me in. You know, you want to let me in. Let me in. Let me. I mean, you know, that makes adults that make me run.
Yeah,
so
for
it's
sure.
something very, very creepy. So yeah,
And especially adult children, like the fact that they're so serious.
yes,
And, you know, as adults, obviously, there's a psychological portion of adults that want to be in control of everything. So now you have children who are the controllers, and that puts something subconsciously, I feel, into adults to make it even more worrisome that may be a real thing.
exactly. But when you're talking about the spaceships, you know, with the reverse cameras and the headlights, and you know, buying their bulbs down at the castle or whatever.
Right?
But what if they aren't traveling by spaceship? If that's what you want to call it. What if they're using portals?
Well, see, that's why I think it's so interesting that we look into the stories of channelers talking to people from Mars. Because if you did have a super highly advanced technological race, they may be not biological entities anymore. They may have evolved to the point where they don't need a physical body. They don't need a physical ship. They're, you know, just manifesting energy forms of consciousness that move throughout the universe. And whether they come through a wormhole or they know some other way to manipulate space-time, it doesn't have to be a physical presence. And so sometimes in my lectures, when I talk about the fact that when I first did lectures in the 90s about alien abductions, those alien abductions are exactly the same as what we call possessions now. You know, you have this I can't move, sleep paralysis, old hag syndrome that's happening in bed, then shadow people in the room and balls of light and buzzing sounds. And that was an alien abduction. Now the narrative, because of popular media, has been turned into that's a demonic possession or there's a ghost in your house. When it really is more fascinating to think that they're the same thing. We just don't have the accurate language to be able to describe the event that's happening.
But as well as the accurate language, then you're basically talking about trending. Like if you think that, you know, like right now everybody's frightened of a pit bull, but then back in the day it was the Rottweiler or the Doberman. And so what you're saying is that still could be an alien abduction, but we're switching it from
Right.
alien abduction, and so whatever the trend is right now.
Yeah, because, you know, before it was alien abductions, it was, you know, it was witches, it was witchcraft. Because someone had put a black magic spell on you, and now you couldn't move in bed. And
Right.
they were in your room and in your house and in your brain. And so you have, you know, witchcraft morphing into alien abductions, morphing back into possessions. It's just fascinating how, as each generation comes up, they pick what they like and then create stories from those stories based on without ever really knowing the history of it. Like I said, a lot of channelers don't know that original channelers were channeling space people. Do you think that the Charlie Chaplin time traveler is a time traveler?
I get really excited about things like that.
I loved it when I first saw it, and then I started like investigating hearing aids at the time. And there are phones, little, not phones, but like horns that people used to put against their ear that had a big piece here so they could listen to things. But it's just the motion of the hand, the way it's being done. But again, we're applying our logic to something that people don't do anymore, which is people don't hold their hearing aids up to their ears anymore, so we don't know how that looks.
You know what's throwing me as well is that ball of light that I saw when I was leaving the farm. Like, I'll just explain this to you. Didn't I tell you this when I was driving back to my farm, and then this massive ball of, and it was like a pale grey with like a lining around it, and it's like 12 o'clock in the afternoon. I'm fully awake. I've just been training, and I'm driving and I'm looking at it, and then my brain is a type. It's oncoming headlights. Okay, maybe the sun is refracting. Maybe someone's got one of those mirrors in their driveway, and the sun's refracting, or it was no rain, no cars. And I looked. I was looking in driveways, and it was just there. And then it went poof, and it disappeared. And I was like, okay. And then it reappeared, and it held for like 4 or 5 seconds, and it went. I mean, I actually stopped my car, and I was getting out, and I'm trying to look at what the hell that was, what anything it could be. And I'm really good at physics and math, so I'm all about, you know, refraction. I couldn't work it out.
How big?
Huge.
Yeah.
Huge. In the sky. Well, not high in the sky, like probably 30 feet in the air. And so then everyone's like, oh, it's ball lightning. And I'm like, how, if it was ball lightning, wouldn't it like Wouldn't it be there and gone?
You know, it's funny that you just mentioned that because we were talking at lunch, like when scientists say ball lightning or they say foxfire or swamp gas. Like if you go on YouTube and look up ball lightning, firefox, or foxfire, swamp gas, if you look up videos of those explanations given, there's maybe like a dozen. Like those ball lightning and foxfire and swamp gas, those occurrences are like rarer than UFO sightings.
Really?
So it's really strange when scientists are like, you're probably seeing swamp gas. It's like, when's the last time anyone's seen swamp gas?
Right. Yeah.
When's the last time anyone has seen foxfire or will-o'-the-wisp, which is, you know, the little dancing lights that are supposedly decomposing marsh gas? It doesn't ever really happen. Their answers are as anecdotal as the stories that people are telling about UFOs. So I find that really interesting. So like you bring up, we were just talking about that at lunch, the fact that somebody said like, could UFOs be ball lightning? It's like maybe, but ball lightning is a completely, it's a rare phenomenon.
Yes, but not twice and not steady.
Right.
Do you think that people are doing time travel now?
In the sense of going forward, yes. I mean, we're all time traveling. The point is to be able to make it faster or slower. Like we're all moving forward together at the same somewhat rate.
Yeah, okay.
So bouncing back and forth in time.
Yeah, like, is it possible? You're familiar with like Project Pegasus,
right.
And do you think that's possible?
I think that it's possible for human beings. First of all, like if you look at people with terminally ill patients, people who have terminal illnesses, they tend to spend their remaining days alone, and they tend to spend their time in places that the environment is non-changing. And so they're making their time slow down. They only have a certain amount of time. So they're personally adjusting the time stream. So we know that our awareness and our consciousness has something to do with it. So for people to be able to, I've talked to time travelers before, and they've always, the two that I've really believed, they always talk about the fact that it's not a physical thing, it's a mental thing. It's projecting their minds into the future. And in both cases, inhabiting people in the future and kind of sitting in their body and watching the future and being able to manipulate the person they're in.
Is that not a little bit like astral projection?
Yes, and it's also like possession. So again, we get back to this combinatorial system where are people time traveling into the past, and the people in the past are channeling beings from the future, and we're hearing about it now as if they're crazy people talking who would talk to Jesus Christ on Mars. But it all starts to make sense if consciousnesses can jump backwards and forwards in time, and you can inhabit someone else's body. If it's not about a mechanical machine that travels time, if it's about something transcendent, and if it's about exchanging energies, I think that's very possible.
But I mean, the theory, if you look at Andrew Passaggio, his theory that they were sending children back into time because they wanted to find out, say, how Lincoln was shot or whatever. I mean, do you put any credence into that?
I think that, again, if you look at the physics of things and you hear about, like, when you ever started with many worlds theory and you add time travel into that, like, you do get that splitting, that division of, like, if someone goes back in time who wasn't supposed to be there, it creates a new branch of reality. And then all of a sudden you can never find the original branch because it just keeps stemming forward. So I mean, I do think that's a possibility, but I don't think you'd ever be able to get back to where you started.
Right, exactly.
I mean, you get to something close,
right,
but it's not going to be the exact one.
His theories, he does put quite a compelling story. I mean, it's a very interesting story, but I mean, he basically implies as well that maybe time travel will be the way of the future, that it's, instead of using vehicles. But then what kind of congestion, or just say that was possible, that we were able to say, I want to go visit my mom in England, and it's like, Mom, I'm going to be there in 30 seconds, but then are we, just saying,
right? Are
we opening ourselves up to all kinds of terrorism? And I mean, do you think that would ever be possible, or we would just keep jumping to different parallels and dimensions?
I really do think that a lot of times with technology, let's say if we did ever develop the technology to do that, I really do think that there are some technologies that would never be made public. That it would never become like driving a car. It would never be that common because the ramifications are so great that someone would want to go back to the earliest part of mankind and stop things from happening.
Right.
Or just any chemical imbalance in someone's head, they have a bad day.
Right.
And they want to just do massive damage. So, I mean, you have to keep it out of the hands of the masses for the good of the masses.
But one of the things that Passaggio was saying was he had spoken about this time that he had jumped into the future with his father and gone to Arizona. And it was 2 years in the future. And his mother and brother just thought they'd gone to the hardware store. And he didn't want to be in Arizona. So he kept saying, I want to call my mom. And the father was saying, well, you can't because she's 2 years behind. But he picked up the phone and somehow that call went through. And he's saying that the mother is on the phone looking at him at present time going, but I can't be speaking to you because I'm looking at you playing with your toys. And so his thing was that you could have that paradox and it wouldn't set off a chain reaction of catastrophic events in the future.
And I know that point too. I mean, I've heard people make that point, the fact that like time is like fabric and you can unthread some of it, but the major part and the major component will stay together and then the smaller threads will wrap back in. But when you have a story of someone traveling through time and then they, like the story you're saying, and he wants to call his mother in the past. Like all of a sudden now there's different aspects of physics at work.
Yeah,
like
how
did that call connect through? That
right.
this one time you traveled time and now the phones are working in your benefit to
right.
prove your story. Like you just have to wonder how much of that story is really being added on to.
Yeah.
And I mean, the time travel story in and of itself doesn't need the extra bonus.
I know, it's just incredible.
Right.
I mean, you just make movie after movie after movie.
I think what's interesting is with time travel, you have so many instances of like transient environment phenomena where every day you go to work and you drive the same route and one day the bank is not there anymore. Or all of a sudden there's a house in a field that you've never noticed before. And everyone else knew that there was never a bank there. Everyone else knew that that farm has always been there in that field. You're the only one that's like, something changed. Something like, and I think that's interesting. I feel like if there is time travel happening and it's happening at some kind of global level, like we're picking up on it, these subtle changes. And when people say things like, even as simple as like when you set your keys down and they disappear and then they're back again.
Right.
You know, there are many different theories about that, but I think that it's maybe these little like time shakes that are happening and time slips that are happening where we're living in one reality. There's a huge community of people on the internet who try and keep track of what movie stars are dead because so many people have ideas about who died, when they died, but some of them are still alive and only certain people remember that they died. And so
you were telling me that about Kirk Douglas, was it?
Mm-hmm. Kirk Douglas. Yeah. So
absolutely insane. What is that?
I have no idea what that is, and I don't know if it's the restructuring of the universe, if something is happening in the past, or, I mean, again,
a parallel dimension.
Again, we say past and future, but you know, if it's a dimension, it all exists at once. So it's not really reconstructing itself back from an event that happened in the past. It's reconstructing itself from the future backwards and then forwards at the same time. Like that's why time travel is so wonky to talk about.
It is. It's really because it blows my mind because, like you said, we could be, you know, what if there's loads of parallels and we could just be switching,
bouncing between one reality and the next.
And then you had a theory, didn't you, on the multiverses, which totally blew my mind.
Which one?
The one that the 11...
Yeah, you have 11 dimensions, and each one of the 11 dimensions is allowed to have 11, just like ours. So then as soon as you have 11, you have an infinite amount of dimensions. And as soon as you have an infinite amount of dimensions, anything is possible. Like, the most ridiculous thing is possible. You could talk to Jesus on Mars. You could talk to the Green Lantern. You could talk to Abraham Lincoln. If you have an infinite amount of realities, anything is possible. I just wait for something strange to happen, because it is possible. You know, it's possible for the roof of my house to vanish and, you know, be sucked into space. It's a possibility. So if there are infinite universes, it becomes, you know, a probability.
Well, that takes me over with the link to time travel, because you're also into the cryptozoology. What if these cryptids that you're seeing are just glimpses into another dimension? Because people just see them for a second and they're gone. And in Bigfoot, we were talking to Chris McDaniel, and he found a footprint that was 14 inches long. The strides were 6 feet apart. Where is it? Where does it go?
Right. And again, this comes back to time travel. It comes back to things like whether it be the ancient Egyptians. But if you think about the fact that people do, what I was saying about terminally ill patients spending time extending time. You think about animals, like animals have no perception of time. So they exist for all time, at least to them. And it bounces in between realities, it bounces in between time frames. Some people see it, some people don't. As a matter of fact, I was talking to someone who is a cryptozoologist, and he was really strangely interested in the fact that in 1967, I think it was 67, when Patterson and Gimlin filmed Bigfoot, before that had happened, there were only like 2 or 3 Native American stories about Bigfoot. And then after the Bigfoot sighting happened, if you go back now and you look through books, there are thousands of Bigfoot sightings that happened to the Aboriginal Americans that were written about, but no one saw them. No one followed through with those stories. Those stories were only found centuries later. Like after they were written, they sat dormant on shelves. No one knew those stories were there. Patterson and Gimlin had that discovery, and then people were like, oh look, we can find 3 instances of this happening in the past. But if you look now, you can find thousands of instances. It's almost like the past was rewritten once Bigfoot was discovered.
That makes
sense?
Yeah, that is really interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But you actually go on Bigfoot investigations or hunts. What do you prefer to call that?
I do lectures, but I don't go on
You
hunts.
haven't been on it?
I love animals and I love creatures, so I just don't even...
They wouldn't hurt one, right?
I think they would.
Really?
Yeah.
Because that was...
People show up armed for a Bigfoot hunt.
That's terrible, because Angie had a really great question, because... I mean, people offer millions of dollars for any kind of evidence of Bigfoot, and and Angie's question was, okay, just say this Bigfoot is operating just on pure animal instinct, it has no compassion, and it's you and Bigfoot's going to take you down. Would you sacrifice yourself so that Bigfoot lives on, or would you kill Bigfoot if he's the only Bigfoot ever seen? Would you kill him? But I guess if you're saying that people go out and hunt.
Like, I know the answer personally is, like, obviously there's always, like, self.
Yeah, preservation.
You have to keep yourself. But, like, I try as best I can every day to not harm anything. So it's just outrageous to me that people want to hunt what could be the almost most extinct animal ever. There might only be, 1 or 2. Or even if, 50,000 is what, the zoologists tell me what they would need for a viable population. So 50,000 Bigfoot worldwide. And you want to shoot one, it's just insane to me.
But that just takes it back to maybe we are de-evolving all the time. I mean, what is that in our nature as humans that it's just kill?
Yeah.
Instead of explore and learn, kill.
Well, and that's the other crazy thing. I mean, not to get too into evolution and talking about educating. If you look at human beings, the peaceful ones, the intellectual ones, the artists, over all the millions of years, were the ones that won. The warlike beings killed themselves into extinction.
Right.
If human beings were a warlike race, we would have never gotten any further than, these small tribes that beat each other to death with clubs. There were always ones outside of the fight who watched it, internalized it, learned that it wasn't a good thing. And those were the people who the tribes grew from. And that's what we evolved from. We evolved from the non-fighters. And so, look, when you talk about de-evolving, like, we are reaching this fever pitch now, whether it be, starting with, like MMA fighting, or just the brutality that we pour upon each other.
Reality TV.
Right. Because for some reason, like, all of a sudden, we've never really had that. It's crazy that a few people, wars, get into conspiracy theories, wars aren't started by people. They're started by, these giant corporate tribes that now exist that need that resource in that area, and so they get the people worked up to fight each other so that they can go in and claim all of the benefits from that area. But it's not our nature. Our nature isn't to fight. It's not to hate.
No, exactly. I know you really love talking about the conspiracy theories. What's your favorite one?
Kennedy, because it's where I started. Like, I just will never not love it, and it's so perfect in its design, in the sense that you have conflicting narratives, you have hundreds of books that all have different accounts of what happened, you have different people's theories of what happened, and like the authors fight with each other over, did he drink a Dr. Pepper when he was, like, just the minutia of it is amazing. And that I find fascinating too, that after the fact, so many people can track down his shoe size, where he bought shoes, what he was drinking, what he had to eat. And they're so fascinated, and yet the question still remains, like, what happened?
Do you have a theory? I mean, you've researched quite a lot.
I think that people ask me, like, who shot him, and I find that question to be kind of almost unappealing to me. I think that when you look at the fact that Kennedy was brought into office and cut defense contracts by hundreds of millions of dollars, said that he was going to destroy the CIA, was going to end the Vietnam War, like, that's a really good motive to kill him. And then who shot him really becomes nonsense. Like, it doesn't really make a difference who pulled the actual trigger, put the bullet into his head, because you realize that there were these larger forces at work, and corporations, military, industrial complex. I mean, you just see, when you end the Vietnam War in 1964, like when you sign that paper, instead of it going until the early 70s, millions of dollars that he was taking out of the coffers of major corporations, like, you got to take him out.
You know, and going back with the conspiracy theories as well, I mean, what's your take on mind control? Do you think that's possible?
Oh yeah. When I started doing lectures, and especially stuff that had to do with hauntings and ghosts, taking magic classes or neuro-linguistic programming classes or hypnosis classes to see how mind control worked, and then my first real kind of like corporate job was working in advertising, doing print advertising, and so there were, even then in the mid-90s, there were a lot of subliminals that we put into advertisements.
Mm-hmm.
And when you watch commercials now, like, you can see the mind control that's happening. You can see, again, the narratives that are being created for viewers.
It makes me laugh with the infomercial. When it's bad, it's black and white, and when it's good, everything's in color.
Yeah,
but wait.
even in any kind of fast food restaurant, like, it's little kids come home from school, there's no one home. They come home to an empty house, right? And then mom shows up with fast food, and they're overwhelmed to just have something to eat. They're like, yay, we have fast food, it's so awesome. And then they sit around, and a lot of the times, like, the mom's not even eating. She's just kind of like sitting in the chair smiling in this weird glassy like face, and the kids are all like consuming and gobbling burgers down. And then the commercial ends, and it's like, that's, have a nice day.
And then that's right in the middle of one of those Discovery with that 800-pound person.
Right, yeah, for sure.
Thanks for the commercial.
Yeah, thanks for putting that back into our minds. But I think that level of mind control has happened for a long time. People will argue that when commercials were done in a different manner in the 1950s, you had television shows. And then once networks knew what demographics we're going to be watching, those when they became programs. And I think that word is telling, because it's not a television show.
It's
showing you
program.
it's television programming.
Yeah, even that I missed on that one. I would never have made the connection. That's smart. But I'm thinking about mind control. Being ex-military, would they use mind control as weaponry? What if you had the ability to have some kind of mind control that you could go to the other side and say, you will put down your weapon, kind of like the Jedi mind trick, you will put down your weapons. Okay, I will put down my weapons, you will surrender.
Well, do
you think that's possible?
Yeah, I do, and I think that in the sense, during my lectures, I sometimes talk about the fact that if you go, like, on Google patent search right now, like, you can find references to electrobiocommunication. You can find the fact that the government does know how to send pulsed EMF waves into a person's head so they hear a voice. So, I mean, whether or not it's a person actually thinking it into your head, or it's a guy somewhere in Oklahoma typing the command into an electromagnetic field generator and pulsing it into the enemy's head, like, it doesn't really matter. I mean,
it's kind of frightening.
It is frightening.
You could do anything like mass suicides and, just terrifying things. If you were going to take it out there to that level, that's terrifying.
And if you look at those patents, most of the research that was done on those patents, you can see test study 1973, test study 1975, and there's little results in there. But if you look through those years when that was being tested, you see that in the United States, the cases of schizophrenia went through the roof. They increased 700%. And now that might just be a coincidence.
700% a coincidence?
Right? I mean, that's what scientists will tell you. It's just a coincidence. It's just when we understood the process of schizophrenia.
That's programming.
Exactly. And so, but you have, any number of test subjects to start telling them that they're, trite, but Napoleon. Just start telling them they're from outer space and see if it works.
But then the other thing with the mind control is the theories out there that you can start to fire the synapses. Somebody out there has a theory that if you fire up the synapses, that you can help develop psychic ability or bring it down. So, I mean, there's so many levels that you can. I mean, do you think that's a possibility to help develop psychic ability?
Yeah, it's strange with the development of psychic ability because I think that we have a ton of latent talents. All humans do. I think all animals do. And we've forgotten totally. We've become so obsessed with our modern, day-to-day lives that we've forgotten what scientists will tell you is instinct. But, whether you call it women's intuition but I do think that we all have it in us. And it's just a process of putting it inside yourself, finding where your place is in your own mind and developing it. I don't know how well these training programs work. I know that there's tons of remote viewing programs on the internet you can take. But the people that I know who I truly think are psychic, who are truly mediumistic, are very quiet people who spend a lot of time in self-reflection and in meditation. A couple of the psychics that I know they're a couple of Buddhist monks, and just they don't speak, and they spend weeks just contemplating everything. And I think that has a huge trigger to develop psychic potential.
I think as well that your psychic ability, I think we are all born with it, but I think a lot of it is conditioning that shuts you down. I mean, how many people have pets that will stare into an empty corner? I mean, they see things and hear things, or they know things. The animals that never get hurt in a tsunami because they know, they sense that. Well, we should have that. But then growing up, you have that conditioning that, no, that's not allowed, you can't speak about that. So you learn to block
to
that.
Suppress it, for sure. I mean, I think that's why kids naturally have more haunting phenomena. They have imaginary friends. And, you do, at some point, you reach an age where people start telling you, there's no Santa Claus, there's no Easter Bunny.
There isn't?
Sorry to be the one to tell you. And so you learn, as a kid, this pattern, people have been telling me all of these things are real, and now they're starting to tell me they're not real. And in some instances, for children, it's really confusing because they get to an age where the parent will say, Santa Claus isn't real, the Tooth Fairy isn't real, Easter Bunny isn't real. God is still real.
Yeah.
And so now you put their minds in these weird states where what's true, what's not.
Exactly.
And that, I think, can have a big problem with people's latent psychic abilities as well. All of a sudden there's a discontinuity in how am I supposed to be thinking about this stuff.
Yeah.
And so is psychic power real? It's, a lot of times people who go to churches, whether you're speaking in tongues, and that happens at a lot of churches, or people are getting, God's telling me this, those are part of psychical phenomena. That's part of telepathy. That's part of...
But they'll still use it in a court of law.
Right.
Yeah, I murdered everybody, but the devil told me to do it. And
I think that really does affect people's abilities, though, like I was saying, to be meditative and you really have to have, I feel like you really have to have a lot of time inside yourself, and people don't do that anymore. Everyone is always out doing something.
Yeah.
And I think very few people spend time thinking about their own internal powers of their mind.
Exactly. Have you ever had any psychic predictions or...
I have premonitory dreams all the time, but I think that that's kind of the underlying pattern of the universe. I think that when you do get into... I drive a lot, and so my brain clicks into that kind of semi-trance state.
Right.
And when that happens, it's the patterns of the universe start to make a little bit more sense. And then when I see or hear something later on the day, I thought, I just thought that. And I realized, not that I was psychic, it's not that I was predicting the future, but I was seeing the kind of strange underlying nature of the universe.
Electronic voice phenomena. Do you have a preferred device to capture this?
Yeah, I am a traditionalist, so I use analog tape, magnetic tape. The thing that's fascinating to me about EVP is so many people do it, and especially in this day and age, everybody has a digital recorder, everybody has, a lot of people use their iPhones.
Yeah.
But that's not like back in the 1940s and 50s when you had people like Jurgensen and Rodiv and people pioneering EVP. they were using magnetic tape and, old school microphones, sometimes creating little diode microphones. And now people are doing EVP and seemingly getting the same results, even though the technology is completely different and working in a completely separate way. So that's a fascinating aspect to me. I'm still using old microphones and little diodes and reel-to-reel tape. And, I get the results that I get, which aren't very many. Book One Last Thing only has 50 EVPs in it over 25 years.
Oh, wow.
But every single one of them is crystal clear.
Sounds
like a voice, and that was kind of the stock method back then. Was like, it didn't matter how long it took. If it took 10 years to get a clear voice, like you just got a clear voice after 10 years, that's amazing. Now when you see people, they go into a haunted location, they come out with 500 at the end of 3 hours.
Yeah, exactly.
But they're all garbled nonsense that don't sound like anything. So there's that aspect to it. But magnetic tape was made to record electromagnetic fields, which is what a voice is. It's a voice sound. And digital recorders have a sensor inside that check air pressure, and then according to the algorithm on the chip in the digital recorder, it reconstructs the sound from that air pressure. Like, that's a completely different medium for recording voices.
Yeah, it totally is, because that's the thing, though. I think because we've gone digital, that's where the conjecture comes up now. It's what is coming through the boxes. And because they are so garbled, it is, you could honestly say that's audio matrixing.
Right.
It's projected thought. Or are we picking up CB signals, or are we picking up signals from outer space?
Well,
just anything.
And now you have things like, people use like Ovuluses and Frank's Box and kind of hijacked radios to get a voice to come out. When traditionally, whether it be Jurgensen or Rodiv or like Vladislav is, like, those people had radios and they would tune them to static, not so that the voice would come out of the radio, but because they realized that the ghost didn't have a mouth, and so it couldn't create sound. And so they thought if it would be easier for the ghost to make a sound if there was a random noise going on in the background. So it was never meant, like, when they wrote their books, they never meant like the voice was coming out of the radio, the voice was coming out of the static. The voice was still manifesting in the room somewhere. It was just using that static or that radio as the medium to record onto tape. But since people don't know that, boxes were created that work, that people have experiences with and work in the same way. So it's like, you come back to this concept of, is it a real voice manifesting? Is it telepathy? Are we impressing our own thoughts and words, and they're manifesting through the box, and we're just getting our own answers in return? It's just a super fascinating field, and I love it.
It is. I mean, you also get some people that all they ever get is negative, 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 and then you have to say, well, is that your frame of mind? Or if you are communicating spirits, is that an earthbound? Is it easier for earthbound, or is an earthbound going to be negative because they haven't crossed into the light?
Right.
So you have to question whether the negative and the positive, but I mean, how do we know what we're communicating with? Or if you think you're getting something positive, it could actually be something demonic that's enticing you or getting you to lay down your trust.
The thing that, whether it's that or EVP, the idea I think that was lost in paranormal research is the fact that, when psychical research was founded in the 1800s, like, there really was no psychology. Like, it was psychical research, and parts of psychical research became psychology, like when people want it to be a science now. Like, some of it did become science, but psychology hijacked it away from psychical research. But when you're doing an EVP session, when you're doing an investigation at a house, like, usually someone in the house knows the history of the house. So are you really drawing out information that wasn't there, or are you pulling it out of the head of someone that's alive that knows the name of the people who died there? Or when you're doing a session where the box is giving you, the box is giving you words, is it drawing from out of the person's head, or is it drawing from an earthbound spirit? Is it drawing from a demonic spirit? The psychical researchers in the 1800s thought there were trickster spirits who were meant to guard the gates of the nether realm, and their only job was to lie. And they weren't being malicious, they weren't being demonic. They were just supposed to confuse the living into not knowing what's next. which I love that too. I love that there are these kind of jokesters standing at the gate saying like, say dog, and that doesn't make any sense, and it'll throw them off for months.
Which leads into those comics that you draw as well.
Right.
So do you have a favorite recording from your EVPs?
I found that in that book, and it comes up a couple times, when I've asked and gotten the response of, like, where are you? A number of times I've gotten the response something similar to or exactly like the always and the forever. And those really blow my mind when I think about them, because as let's say a disincorporated person now existing in the electronic stream of fields of forever, like, how do you explain that you exist throughout all of time and space, past, present, and future? And so when the response comes back, I'm in the always or I'm in the forever, like, it just makes me like really happy to think that I'm going to be a part of all of that one day.
I mean, do you believe in reincarnation?
I don't believe in anything.
Do you have a theory on reincarnation?
I have no problem with it. I think that if you look at the work that's being done, which is, whether it's Brian David Josephson or any of the researchers who work with near-death experience, one of the things that they can do is use children to see if there are, if children's minds are picking up memories from when they had their previous lives. And I don't have a problem with that. The world and the universe seems to recycle energy all of the time in many different forms, and we're just a part of that, so I wouldn't have a problem with it.
I mean, what do you think about, like, when we're born with an irrational fear? Okay, I'm a strong swimmer, and I'm terrified of water. I'm born with it. I've never had a bad experience in a pool, terrified of water. If I see a bathtub, a big cast iron bathtub, and it's got those claw feet, I can't breathe. I'm so terrified of that. So what is that? I can't recall ever having a bad dream, a bad experience. And then you see these do you remember the documentary once about the little child in India that was born? He was really young, like 7 or 8. And he went back and he was saying, this is my wife and these are my kids, and he was describing everything. I mean, that blows my mind. Yeah,
I really do think that, like I said, I think that energies can be recycled. I think that to a certain degree, probably some memories, some parts of our conscious being can be recycled into new people. But I also think that there's so much hidden from us, hidden in our genetics, hidden in our makeup of millions of years of evolution. At some point, like with your irrational fear of water, like at some point, our ancestors left the water. They got scared. Like something happened that made them leave the water, whether it was a larger predator, but we had to get out. We had to get onto land. Right. And that's stored in our genetic makeup somewhere.
Probably like a lot of people being scared of heights.
Right. So, I mean, it's one of those things. It's the way, like, I've never been attacked by a panther, but most humans, if you play a panther growl, like, something happens inside of humans where after millions of years we still remember that someone was chased across the field because that panther was going to eat us, when we were tiny little Australopithecus.
You do have a very valid point there. But then going back to the EVPs then, do you believe that playing with these boxes, for want of a better word, do you think that could be opening up a portal to the other side where anything could come on in?
No, I think that you find that argument with people. People want to say a Frank's box or any kind of obulus, even Ouija boards, things like that. They open portals. I think that what they do more than anything is they just, again, it focuses you on you, and whether or not it opens the portal, it opens up new portions of your thinking. It opens up new portions of your consciousness.
Including paranoia?
Including paranoia, absolutely. And so those things can be taken as, now you have a demonic attachment to you.
Right.
But in reality, what you've done is you've just opened up this part of your brain that was never open before. And some people, that's a very frightening experience, to have their worldview totally changed.
You can have that. I mean, if you are going to open up, and take that argument, and it's the power of thought. So if you have gone in and you say you're doing the Ouija board and you have made yourself paranoid, and then you start to believe that, then that's when you can turn everything into, every little tiny thing. Oh, it's because I'm possessed, or because something negative has come in. Have you ever played with the Ouija board?
I have, many times. I have about 50 of them.
Now?
Yeah.
Really?
People send them to me. People get afraid that they're haunted or that they have
Oh,
a spirit
really?
locked in them.
So they all send it to
And
you?
so over the years, I've now ended up with like 50 of them.
You open a Ouija board museum.
I could. They're all the really bad 70s ones, like all the, not even real wood, kind of cardboard.
Right.
They're just in my garage.
But so you use them and nothing ever?
Nothing. I mean, what naturally happens, which is you push it around without really knowing that you're doing it. That micromotor muscular response that makes things happen. If
Right.
you push it to an M, unconsciously you start to move to a vowel because there's not very many M consonant letters. So now you go to an O, and then is it going to spell mom? And you push it around until satisfies yourself.
Well, have you ever had a paranormal experience? I mean, yeah, paranormal. I was going to say supernatural. Some people don't like the word paranormal.
I kind of like supernatural.
Okay.
I really like anomalistic. I think
I
that's
know you do
much better.
because that's on your website lots.
Yes. I just feel it's a better word. I feel like paranormal, I feel like so much of these experiences are normal.
But I just didn't want to mean like, have you been abducted by an alien? I was, the question was, maybe I should phrase it better. The question is, have you ever been visited by an apparition or have anything really profound happen to you that you couldn't explain?
Many, many times over the past 25 years, whether it be seeing full-bodied apparitions or seeing a UFO. Never been abducted as far as I know, even though there's a weird story in there somewhere.
Yeah.
But the weird story is, I tell this at my lectures only recently, which is my entire life have hummed a tune. And I do it whenever I'm nervous. And never thought anything about it. It's just a tune in my head that I hum when I'm nervous. And only a few years ago, I went and visited my parents at their home where they retired to. And I'd gotten in a huge fight with my father, and so I was sitting in the living room and I was humming the song. And my mother said, "Oh, you still sing that song?" And I said, "Yeah." And she goes, you've done that ever since you were a little boy." And I said, "Yeah, I know." And she goes, "It's just really funny that that's what you've held on to, is that singing that song." And I said, "Well, humming it," I go, "there's no words to it." She's like, "There's words to it." And I couldn't consciously remember the words to it. And I was like, "There are words to it?" And she goes, "Yeah." And she told me the lyrics. This is a couple years ago. And the lyrics were, "Close your eyes and cover your face. There's little men from outer space touching your face." And those were the lyrics. So the song that I hum when I'm nervous. So, I mean, I have to think, what is going on in my past?
Exactly. What did you think when you first found out what those words were again?
I freaked out. I was like, oh no. Because that's kind of classic, abduction, but you forget the memory of it. But there's, some latent thing that goes on that makes you, so I don't know.
But with my...
Apparitions, yes. UFOs, yes. I mean, I've had a lot of very strange experiences, but they're only real when they're happening.
Right.
A fraction of a second later, my brain is rationalizing them out. How did I hallucinate? What am I seeing?
That's exactly what my question was going to be, because, I mean, you have such a curious probing mind that, most of us, we had full body apparition, and we'd be out of the room like an exocet missile. And I can imagine you going, wow, that's really cool.
The first time I saw a full-bodied apparition, I bolted out the door.
Did you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I heard something
Mental
coming down.
picture.
I had something coming down the steps, and I knew I was the only one in the house. And I ran to the front door, and I opened the front door, but I couldn't leave because I wanted to see what was going to come down the steps.
Conflict. Paradox.
And this thing stepped down from the steps, and I saw the shape of a human being. And I mean, that was it. Then I was out the door and down the street running. I think I was 17 or 18 at the time.
You want to admit that? I would have said I was 7.
No,
7 or 8.
17.
So, if you saw one now, would you still run away, or what would you do?
I don't know. I would tend to think that I wouldn't, but in those stressors, in those situations, you never know how the body's going to react. Like, a lot of times instinct will kick in, you'll want to flee.
Right.
But sometimes curiosity will get the better of you.
I just find that so weird that you're sitting there and you're collecting like 25 years worth of EVP, you're trying to find answers, and then an apparition appears in front of you and you take off.
Right. But I mean, that would happen long before. I mean, I was 17 at the time.
Okay.
And
a punk rocker, right?
Yeah.
At that point. So
Yeah.
that's even better visual.
Right. Electric blue hair, eyeliner, black fingernails, black lipstick. But you know, you didn't have television. You didn't know how to react. Like, there weren't shows telling me how to investigate a haunted house.
Exactly.
And so, as a 17-year-old, you know, back in the 80s, you go in, and I think at the time, like, I maybe had like white candles with me. Even if you look at like Hans Holzer, like the grandfather of ghost hunting, when I went and saw lectures that he did in the 80s, he would tell you, like, if you don't want a ghost in your house, tell the ghost to leave, and it'll go. And again, we've lost that somehow. Somehow now that doesn't work.
Well,
you know, because of TV and people see like that you can't just walk in. How good of a ghost hunting show is that for reality television? If someone has a ghost in their house and the camera crew comes over and someone says, "Okay, ghost, you can go home," and then at the end of the episode, like,
okay, script.
Right.
That's so funny. So I'm going to take another cosmic jump here.
Uh-oh.
Do you believe? Yeah, don't worry. Do you believe in vampires?
In the sense of, I mean,
do you think they exist? I'm not talking about people pretending or dressing up as vampires, but I mean literally living their life as a vampire. Sucking blood and sleeping all day, coming out at night.
I know personally that there are people like that. Whether or not it has to do with how they dress and whatever, but because of the scene, the punk rock scene that grew up in the 80s, like, there is a gothic scene that isn't what is portrayed on television and not what you see in a lot of nightclubs. There are people I do know personally who drink blood and stay up, you know, at night, sleep during the day, and have these weird habits. What I think is more interesting is that concept of, like, energy vampires.
Yeah.
People who are around you and they just drain this unscientific, not provable energy that we all have in us. I think that's interesting to me when you talk about vampires. You can just sit next to someone and instantly get drained of all of your life's essence.
Do you not find it fascinating that so many people believe in this stuff and spend hours and hours researching? Why can't we ever get any funding to research this as a science? Not necessarily the vampires, but, you know.
I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that when something paranormal, supernatural, anomalistic, when a portion of it is explained, kind of like what's like a research in psychology, it's immediately grabbed by the scientific field, and it's not paranormal anymore. So you had scientists for years and years and years and years say there's no such thing as the aura. The body does not produce any kind of energy field that can be seen in any way, shape, or form. But everyone has seen MRI scans. Yeah. And that's what it's doing, is it's reading the electromagnetic fields coming off of the brain. So there is an electromagnetic field that is made by the human body that can be registered and seen by something, not with our eyes. We need a machine to do it, but it's there. And scientists are like, oh, but that's just the naturally occurring electromagnetic field around the body.
And then they're just going to keep changing it. I mean, you get another 20 years and then they prove something and say, okay, well, we were wrong. And
right.
But how far does, I mean, this has been going on forever and ever, that people have had sightings or experiences. And, you know, at least we're at a point now where it's more open and people can discuss it. But
I think that's a huge step to it, is being able to talk about it openly. Because we can see how different things are. And we need to talk about the crazy, quote-unquote, crazy experiences, because there's a lot in those as well that gets glossed over. You know, when you hear Bigfoot sightings, certain key points of the story get cut out because they don't fit our narratives.
Right.
Same things happen with hauntings and with UFOs. The book that I'm kind of working on now, which is Haunted Saucers, that looks at that connection between ghosts and UFOs. The thing that's so fascinating is that, you know, there's something that's associated with ghosts, and I'm kind of writing this chapter right now, but there's something that's associated with ghosts where there's like a rumbling sound of almost like a muffler, and that gets deleted from the narratives of people's stories because they don't think it's important. So even when you're talking to people about ghosts, if you ask them, like, do you hear a mechanical rumbling sound, like, during this haunting? If you ask them that specific question, all of a sudden they're like, yeah, but, you know, I don't think that has anything to do with it. They don't.
Right.
But if you ask, you see that all of these people are experiencing, and it's a small piece of the narrative that we're missing that may be adding to a much larger portion of the story.
Because that even goes back to the Saggio things. He was, in his theory, what he was saying was the reason that he was sending children back, it was not for the big picture, it's for those tiny, tiny little details, and that's what we learn from. And so, like you said, I mean, yeah, how many thousands of people have dismissed that?
Right.
Have heard it. I'm trying to think now. I don't think I've heard that, but I don't know now that you've said it.
Right. Because we don't focus on that little aspect. The same thing that happens with Bigfoot sightings. Most people don't report that within an hour before, an hour and after, there's a huge flash of light. It's lightning. People always say lightning, but there's no sound, or there was some electrical lightning that night. But that doesn't have anything to do with the Bigfoot sighting. Yet, every time there's a Bigfoot sighting, if you dig into their story, you find flashes of light sometimes.
I mean, just Bigfoot, or what about,
cryptids, and
all
not
of them
just
generally?
Bigfoot.
Yeah, because, that makes sense. Even going back to what you were saying about earlier, what if they are eternal? Because Loch Ness, since I was born, if you talk about probably longer.
Right.
With Loch Ness. And, okay, here's the next cosmic leap, zombies.
I met a zombie once.
Oh, so did I last night at the bar about 2 a.m. Boom! No, go ahead, tell me.
I was friends with a folk magic practitioner in Detroit back in the early 90s. And over a period of a few months, I learned her family's history and became really good friends with them. And she introduced me to a member of their family who, when I first met the family, they told me he had died. It was her sister's brother, or her sister's husband. And when I first met the family, I learned that he had died. About 6 or 7 months later, I met him. And it wasn't that he was dead, it was that they drugged him, faked his death, collected his insurance money, and he was a brain-damaged individual. A zombie, like a traditional zombie. And he was living in an efficiency apartment and just kind of stared at the wall and had a midnight job of sweeping floors in a junior high. And was nonverbal, glassy-eyed, and had to be picked up and dropped off every day from work, and had to be fed.
Oh my gosh!
So real zombie.
I wasn't expecting you to say that.
Yeah.
So, but
which makes me think it's ever since that day, whenever I see people on the street, whether they be homeless or whatever like that, I think well, I know of a single zombie. Like there's got to be thousands of them.
But there's actually people out there that are preparing for a zombie apocalypse. I mean, what do you? I mean, seriously, if it got to that, I don't think I would want to survive.
Right.
And then of course then you've got the thing with the bath salts going on, so that just adds fuel to that fire.
For sure.
I just have such trouble wrapping my head around zombies.
I think that zombie apocalypse. I think that. You can take zombie out, and I think it's just that apocalypse mentality that people love.
Okay, so they're just looking.
Like, I think they love it because it satisfies those psychological needs. We all have a doomsday. We just don't know when it is. We all have a personal doomsday, and it's going to come whether we want it to or not.
Right.
So an apocalypse, an end of the world, is this satisfying where you die with everyone else dies with you. You're not going to miss anything because it was the end of the world.
Right.
And your life has some meaning because when everything in the world ended, you were there to see it. And so it satisfies psychologically that every generation continues to think that they're the last generation. The world is going to explode because it gives meaning to everyone's death. And so people get into it.
It's such a morbid, fascinating. Even with the people that are frightened about 21st of December, wasting their life worrying. Didn't we have this when it was 1999 to 2000? How many times did you say that it's going to be
41 times in my lifetime
that they predicted it's going to be the end of the world? How many people actually take that seriously, and it affects their day-to-day living? Because I know I'm going to keep buying Christmas presents for this year.
For sure.
But one.
Now you have people on television, you look, and then people buy 50-gallon buckets of lima beans and like a 100-gallon bucket of granola for the end of the world.
And the Bermuda Triangle, any theories about that?
I get fascinated with things like that. I understand that a lot of it, if you look at a lot of the boats that disappeared in the Bermuda Triangle, they're not really in the Bermuda Triangle, they're kind of around it. Michigan is like that too. We have the Great Lakes Triangle. Like we've actually had more boats and planes disappear in our Great Lakes than
That's not going out towards Mackinac, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all of the lakes, Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, Superior, in those lakes we've had more boats and planes vanish than in the Bermuda Triangle.
And they don't actually talk about that very much, or
No.
not as much as the Bermuda.
No.
The Bermuda Triangle. I'm going to give you these 10 quick fire questions.
All right.
Okay? Are you ready for them?
I guess.
What's your favorite word?
Real.
What's your least favorite word?
Stagnant.
And what turns you on?
Knowing.
What turns you off?
Not wanting to know.
And what sound or noise do you love?
That's a good question. Heartbeats. Mm-hmm.
What sound or noise do you hate? Don't say lack of. Heartbeats.
I hate the, viscerally, I hate the sound of my mother crying.
Yeah, oh yeah. I'm like that, a man crying, I can't, that really upsets me. Okay, what's your favourite television show?
Twilight Zone.
Yes. Yeah. What profession other than your own would you like to attend?
I've done them all already. Profession. I think I might like to be an oceanographer.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Why?
Huge, unexplored.
Yeah, I should have asked. What profession would you not like to do?
I was a custodian for a while. I just could not do that for my whole life. I mean, I understand it. I know some people love to do it. I was a custodian in elementary school. I just hated it.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that not being enough for you. Okay, well, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Now it begins.
It's along the lines of what I said.
Yeah.
Yeah. I could have spoken to you for at least another 4 hours.
Did we talk for 4 hours?
I want to talk for another 4 hours. There's just so much to talk about, but thank you so much.
No problem. I hope there's something in there you can use.
Absolutely.
Good.
I appreciate it. Thank you.